all accounts because the alleged perpetrator, um, spit on a Marine security guard outside the embassy and then threatened to blow up the embassy and then was promptly detained and transported back to New York for, you know, investigation. So that didn't work out too well for the individual. Um, Usually doesn't when you mess with Marines. Speaking from personal experience, I was one for a while, so it doesn't typically not a smart move, but thankfully he did that because then we're able to um, apprehend the individual and get him on his merry way. We had, unfortunately, sadly, two embassy workers from the Israeli embassy were gunned down um, in an attack in DC. So that was tragic and terrible. And by all accounts, these guys had nothing to do with anything going on in the region. So that's a shame. And sadly, the perpetrator looks like I don't think he was even Palestinian. I think he was just a sympathizer who clearly mentally ill. Decided to invoke violence and terrible tragedy there. We did have a few air incidences as well, which unfortunately the trend in 2025 it seems like aviation tends to yeah, I don't know if it's I honestly don't know what it is, because I don't think I've seen a year where there's been this much focus on the aviation industry. And I don't know if that's just because in the past we just didn't focus on the aviation industry as much, and now all eyes are on it because of all the incidences, or if 2025 is just not a good year for flying. Um,
Chalking it up to be just a bad year.
I hope so. I can't wait for this year to be over. I'm telling you, when it comes to the flying aspect, especially as much as you and I travel, it's like,
I've actually been, I've only traveled a couple of times this year, actually. I'm very thankful for that. I've been actually
yeah,
keep most of my travel down to a minimal only because my work has been all out here in LA. So
yeah. So.
let's, let's see what happens.
Yeah, yeah. I unfortunately have not been so lucky, but I'm still here, right? So we'll call that a win. Um, we also you know, had a few other instances occur. Kind of primarily what we're going to talk about today is the wrench attacks with crypto and some of the implications there, kind of what's going on with that, doing some analysis behind how this all comes about, the targeting aspect of this, how people are being targeted, how that data was obtained in the first place. And I think really more so the goal here is to kind of educate the audience on um, some proactive steps you can take for self protection, but then also, you know, when you find out that your data has been potentially leaked and that your risk profile has been raised to a certain degree, what do you do next, right? And that's, I think, the critical point here is like, okay, I now realize that things that I thought were private information that were safeguarded are no longer safe. They're out in the wild. I'm concerned, based on either your net worth or maybe potentially who you're associated with, or the potential net worth as well, right? Guys who are maybe working at startups that might IPO soon, right? Potential net worth, gains there, make you a target, right? So what do you do next? You find out, okay, I've been had. People know who I am now. I've been unmasked. What do I do next, right? So there's some cyber steps you can take. There's some physical security steps you can take. I think we're probably going to kind of dive deep into that aspect. of what steps you can take if you find yourself in that position. God forbid, and hopefully none of the guys listening ever have to deal with that. But in the event you do, or if you're working in a security team that has to deal with that issue, like let's kind of dive into that a little bit about what your options are. Um, so why don't we kick it off with the overview, like what's been happening? I mean, there's been several wrench attacks globally too, right? It's not localized to one area. It's This is global. So it's very concerning, right?
Yeah. So I mean, let's start with let's start with what's going on here. And if you guys missed an article yesterday on NPR, there was an article. I think it was done during their All Things Considered segment, talking about how an Italian man was kidnapped and tortured for 3 weeks in a townhouse in New York City, in an effort to actually separate him from his wealth. So he wanted his Bitcoin password. Um, and it's not just an isolated incident, it's a growing number of these violent physical attacks on cryptocurrency investors. And there's I think Fortune ran also an article too as well, Fortune magazine. So go check out Jeff John Roberts articles on this. And the idea or concept of wrench attack quite literally is a wrench. But the premise comes from an XKCD comic about passwords, where you could have this wonderful set of encryptions and everything like that, state of the art technology, but it'll cost you millions of dollars to crack that password, or go buy a $5 wrench and beat the password out of that person.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in one thing we don't know if these are coordinated or if it's just I hate to use this word, but it's gone viral, right? The use of the wrench and everything. We don't know. We don't have that information yet if it's a coordinated effort, but it's very concerning, as you can all imagine. Being beaten with a wrench will ruin anyone's weekend, and that's me putting it lightly. And so, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of components here, right? And me and Josh have talked about this convergence of physical and cybersecurity, and this is a great example of that. Of you know maybe you do invest heavily in the cyber side, right? And you do have that uncrackable password, right? But have you invested enough in the physical side to prevent that threat vector and vice versa, right? Maybe you have the greatest fence and the greatest moat and the greatest castle that you live in, but you didn't change your Wi-Fi password at home, so you have the standard account. So people are just getting all the information they need from you, and still causing you harm. So I think these are very interesting situations all around, and it truly is kind of a convergence of both threats in one. Leveraging physical to then compel somebody to give you their password versus you know primarily we've seen this social engineering emails or text messaging or something like that. Now physically beating people's passwords out of them.
Or just
Um,
physically showing up and having doing this in your pocket, it looks like a gun in there. That's
yeah, yeah,
enough to put someone
the,
under duress
yeah,
and
the physical
password.
intimidation factor, and when we consider the rise of cryptocurrency. And why do people want to use crypto, right? There's the anonymity piece. You're kind of anonymous.
It's not really anonymous. Let's just be honest.
Well,
It's so
it's not, but there's a lot of people who still perceive it to be anonymous, right? And there's a large and growing off-grid movement in the United States, as is other places, of people who don't want to be necessarily tied to mainstream currency or mainstream banking institutions. So this stuff has picked up, right? Similarly, what else has happened is Coinbase, one of the largest crypto wallet providers, they had a hack. So I think it was close to 97,000 users were their data was stolen. Um, the the group that perpetrated that attempted to ransom the data and get a $20 million ransom from Coinbase. Coinbase refused. So that data was then released in the wild. Now, speculation on my part, but um, what people have speculated is that with the release of that and several other hacks of the information, individuals have leveraged the dark web to kind of build profiles on people. And that is kind of what has led to the targeting of certain investors, certain people affiliated with crypto. Um, these are, we would consider high net worth individuals at this point if you look at the crypto holdings that they have. But I don't believe that a lot of these people felt that they were in danger or felt that they were either consider themselves high net worth individuals, even though they were sitting on several, at times several millions of dollars worth of crypto assets, right? And so it brings up a lot of different issues, right? It brings up, you could be a average Joe, another dodgeball reference there. Average Joe, and turn into a Globo gym overnight with crypto, right? Where you made the right investments and all of a sudden the market turns and you're now sitting on several millions dollars of net worth, right? So you may not feel that you've changed, and you may not feel like other people know about this, or that you need to change your lifestyle, but the bad guys don't really care. The bad guys are looking at ways to, you know, obtain more wealth, more power, all that good stuff. So it's something that I think a lot of investors, especially in the crypto space, don't consider. It's like, yes, crypto's great because you could, I mean, you have the potential of making a lot of money. You also have the potential of losing a lot of money, which brings up other issues. But what do you do if your portfolio goes to the moon? How
I,
are you going to change your lifestyle?
I think that's, applies to any of the investments that are people doing. Like if you're riding the current stock wave, the
Yep.
up and down and shorting stocks of what's going on right now, or you're into the GameStop or any other meme stocks that's out there. I mean, there's a lot of wealth generation that's actually happening, but the question becomes one of how are you protecting yourself. And I think the thing people forget about is that in cryptocurrencies, your ledger is actually public information.
Right.
You may not know who owns the ledger, but your wallet is just sitting out there. Anyone with good enough math skills can figure out at least, how much is a wallet worth. Then the last hurdle has become one of, okay, who owns that wallet,
Right.
which attacks on various exchanges, whoever you're using to quote unquote bank with, or hold your wallet with, like a Coinbase. Um, uh, Once you figure that out, then this wallet address equals Josh Rao, and at that point, then what's the next question you ask? Well, where does Josh live? What does he
Right,
have?
right. And a
What does
lot of,
he own?
fortunately, a lot of this stuff is public information, and or it's already on the dark web because of other hacks, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not difficult to piece the information together, especially with AI tools. You can do a lot of analysis, large data set analysis very quickly, and the right minds can piece it all together and get in a very short time get all the information they need to at least um, have enough information to find out where you are, where you work, potentially get surveillance on you and figure out your pattern of life. Especially, like I always use a Starbucks reference. If Starbucks gets hacked, people know what Starbucks you go to, right? They know what you order. They know when you're going to be there. I mean, all that pattern of life information is there. Typically, morning coffee is pretty routine for a lot of people, and so it's really easy to know where you're going to be at certain times of the day, right? And then even gym memberships, people typically pick a time where they're going to go to the gym. They don't vary very much when it comes to their workout time. Meal time, especially when you're in the office, if you're not provided food, you know, there's typically lunch areas where everyone's going to in the business parks, right? A certain amount of
Yeah.
times. It's really easy to kind of figure out if you have certain key pieces of information, which aren't hard to get, where you're going to be at any given time, right?
Yeah, and I think most people forget the fact of two things. Number one, we're creatures of patterns. We're creatures of habits. I mean, think about it. When you have kids, you put them on a very, very strict schedule because you want them to go to bed and wake up at a certain time. You're very, very rigid about your schedule because you want to, instill certain patterns or whatever you want to instill on the kids. But the other one I want to always remind people of is that um, uh, with the advent of social media, by virtue of your patterns, people can actually find out who you are in very short
Right.
order. There are the internet is not anonymous. It is very, very much, you can figure it out. Classic case in point, you think you're anonymous and, you post a picture of yourself, in some shape or form. But if you leave enough information or, you have a lot of indicators like, a scar or a tattoo, a mole, a beauty mark, whatever, um, it's enough to say, hey, so and so is this body, even though you chop off the head. If you
Right.
have enough of it, you can align and align and say this is so and so. And I think with also the advent of social media, the challenge has been one of that we unintentionally and yet intentionally overshare. We share a lot of information, just like small bits and pieces of information. It's enough for you to actually draw inferences. Like, for example, if you always post stories about basketball games and stadiums and stuff like that, well, we know you're a sports fan, and we can infer that you like Lakers or something like that,
Right.
or Lego or Star Wars. I mean, we love and follow trends. Like who you interact with, who you follow with, shares a lot about who you are and what you prioritize and value in life. And, all these little bits of information helps draw a picture. And that's how an adversary actually would prey upon you. They would actually, look at all this information and ask the question, how do I get you at these various angles? And they will come at you, like completely come at you. And Al, let's ask this one question. I think it's begging on everyone's mind. How much money is so much money where you would actually need protection detail? How much is enough? I plugged this into ChatGPT the other day, and it gave me the number of $3 million.
So yeah, it's a very interesting kind of question, right? Because it's all relative and it's all scalable, right? I like to look at things in terms of liquid money. And this is why it's there's several people out there who might have a net worth of $3 million, right? Or they may have a net worth of $5 million, but it's tied up in assets such as a house, maybe precious metals, maybe other assets, tangible assets that you can't really make liquid, right? So, but I think when you look at things in terms of liquidity and what can someone easily get out of you, right? Through either a bank account hack or physically like express ATM kidnapping, or in the case of the crypto wrenching, right? Hitting you with a wrench and then turning over your wallet, giving them control of your wallet, right? I think that is a better way to look at this problem. So how much net worth do you have, and that's obviously a good indicator, right? But then you have to look at liquid assets. How quickly can somebody get that money out of you, right? And what kind of force is needed to do that? I think that's a better way to view this problem, when I always look at it. And so I think if we state it as 3 million in liquid assets that can quickly be transferred over, I think now you're looking at that's a good way to measure this, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Like, what's how liquid is your assets? Like, you can go liquid a T bond fairly quickly, but you can't liquidate a house very quickly.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And I think that's part of the individual's risk profile and threat profile, right? if you're like I say, this example, you say you're a real estate agent and you have a ton of money tied up in real estate, right? Um, but you only really carry, you know, you don't have a lot of liquid assets. You're not saying that you're not a target, but you're not an ideal target unless there's a quick way for us to get you to transfer the house titles over in our name, right?
And that's a
Which
pretty easy way you think about it too, because you're generating paper trails like galore.
right, right. So, you know, I think when we view these type of events and incidences, um, it's always like looking at it's almost the same as looking at a shoplifter. A shoplifter is looking at a target that they can easily get in and out, grab what they need, or grab, you know, items that are going to generate an ROI on the black market or what have you, right? Um, and present the lowest risk to getting caught, right? So when we consider high net worth individuals and where their money is and how accessible they are, you know, it's like there are people worth several millions of dollars, sometimes billions of dollars, and they should have executive protection just because of who they are and the impact they may have to the companies that they run or to whatever it is that organizations that they belong to rely on them for you know operations or strategy or management, right? But if they're not very liquid, then we, you know, I think that threat profile reduces significantly, right? And we look more at um, you know, the threat, right? The what's the threat to this individual? Somebody doesn't like them. Somebody has a moral beef with them or an ideological beef with them, and they want to cause them harm from that aspect, but not necessarily, um, you know, take their wealth or drain their wealth directly, right? This is what makes this crypto thing very interesting because, um, you know, you have, you know, crypto for all intents and purposes is pretty easy to liquidate, right? If you have the password, you can get in there and you can liquidate very easily. Um, so I think that you know, it changes the game quite a bit, especially if you know who you know the high value holders of crypto assets are. And if they're not protected, if they're not using executive protection or they're not, you know, practicing hard targeting techniques, which we can get into a little bit later, um, you know, you become a very juicy target because you don't necessarily think you need something because you think it's safe in your phone, right? And it's not necessarily safe, and you're not necessarily safe, and you become a target.
Yeah, just remember the advent of Face ID or Touch ID. All they have to do is, just point their phone at your face, and they get
Yeah.
your right into your phone. Um, I want to point out something. You brought up some, great points here. Um, Most people don't think about this stuff until it's too late. And I think, that's kind of the message I'm hearing as you're talking about this is, we go about our life, we think, we live in these brick houses and we're protected. And I don't care if you are like old money, like, living like driving a Honda Accord, or you drive like Justin Bieber and flashy with a silver diamond wrap, car. Um, no matter what in this day and age, it's pretty evident that you have to take some reasonable steps to protect yourself. It's
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
not possible, not to think about these things because, for all especially in this day and age, by the way, you think about all the romance scams and everything that's happened. It's easy to, collaborate with a traditional gang potentially, and they have, someone that shows up on your doorstep. So, the criminal masterminds may theoretically be in India for all they care, but, all they want is 50% of the money, and you can keep the other 50%. And, if you think about it, a lot of these groups and these guys who intend to do you harm, you have to look from their perspective as this is a business to them. They're in the business of threatening you. They are in the business of causing you harm. They're in the business of robbing you. And when you think about that perspective, your mind shifts. It's not a individual who's perpetrating this. No, it is a group of people whose sole job is to apply as many screws and apply as much pressure, whether emotionally, physically, mentally. They will apply every single tactic upon you to actually extort you and get you to pay money. And when you think about that, then that really puts you in a perspective of saying, okay, if these guys are intending to do harm, how do I protect myself? Because you're thinking it's you versus them. It's one guy who ambushes you somewhere, whether online or physically, and it's just you. That's not a fair comparison, because it's really an army on this side and you. And
Yeah.
that really, really shapes and shifts your perspective when you think about it. There's like 50 people right there, all, getting a slice of the pie, and they're there to just, do harm to you.
And I think a lot of people, to your point, I think a lot of people think this is an individual based type attack, right? Just some individual who doesn't like me or who knows me is going to do this. But I mean, we have a term for this. It's called transnational crime organizations, TCOs, which literally it's organized crime that spans multiple countries. And, what the present kind of state of the world, the global marketplace makes really easy is I can collaborate here in the US with members of pretty much any country. And I can hire somebody to do a phishing scam on you or do a romance scam on you, fully knowing that, you know, I'm going to send a physical person out there to also do harm to you while my associates in another country are potentially scamming you and draining your bank accounts and doing that. I can physically, get out there and steal your car, steal your laptop, rob your house, as they set up a romance game and you leave the house to go on a date to meet someone that you thought you were going to meet. I know you're not there. They tell me that you're not there. You've confirmed that you're going to the date at this time, this day, at this location, away from your home. I can go into your home now because I know you're not there. And I'm working in conjunction with somebody who's not even in the country. I mean, this is the reality of where we're at in 2025. That you have multiple organizations across multiple continents working in tandem to get to cause harm to individuals with essentially same objectives. One is trying to drain your bank account, and one is trying to physically take your stuff, right?
Yeah, I think that's something to be, mindful of. You look at how ransomware actors play to this day. It's just not enough that they say, "Hey, if you want your business back, pay us money and you'll get it back." No, they diversify their revenue streams, by holding your business for ransom and the associated data. Then they will extort you for that, saying, "Oh yeah, backup's fine. I'm going to extort you and say and tell all your customers that if you don't pay me, I'm going to tell them that you stole I stole your data and your security sucks." Um, they will find multiple ways to accomplish the same goal, and the same thing applies here, especially in this wrench attack. They will do everything reasonably possible to actually extort you. And before the show, Al and I were just talking a little bit here and just going, okay, if I was a bad guy, what would I do? Like, how would I do it? Well, if I was a bad guy, I would go through the exchanges. I would, find that Coinbase data. I would, take all the data, throw it into some sort of ingestion engine, sort it by who has the most money versus who has the least amount of money in crypto holdings. And then, start figuring out like the top 10, top 20, top 30 people, top 50 people. Just keep going down the list, trying to build a dossier, trying to build a profile. If you weren't careful the first go around when you first stepped on the internet, you created like a bit of a footprint. Al and I have been very careful about our footprints. Granted, we are showing our faces here, so someone could probably rip it and, create an AI version of us today because of all the podcast episodes. But, if you look around, at least for myself, I have a very controlled profile picture. There's like maybe one or two pictures of me, maybe three pictures of me that I've actually really approved to be in the public domain for anyone to use. If you also look at any of the usernames, I scatter, a lot of my usernames across the board. Yes, I have like, my common normal usernames because I've had my username since my gaming days when I was in an interactive entertainment. And I still keep those usernames. But if you find where I've gone since, it just kind of goes down a black hole. You're not really sure where I am or hiding at that point. But, I would take everything I can. You're looking for what I call nexus points. What my nexus points is everyone has a nexus point of data that connects to who you are. So that's email addresses. I'm willing to bet some of you still have your first email address probably sitting around somewhere that is still associated to you. And it's a 10, 15-year-old email account that you probably use. I still have those. I'm pretty sure you still have phone numbers that you've kept. Maybe your first cell phone number is still yours. That's, I still have, old cell phone numbers I still keep around. If you are a creature of habit and you use your password all over the place, it has been stolen from all the myriad of data breaches. Also a problem too, because that means that password is compromised completely. So they can log into these various accounts of yours, especially you have a common, username. And most websites these days are getting away from just a username based login. They're getting into your username being your email. Well,
Yep.
and they can log in and then they can see everything. So like maybe your Amazon account is the same email address that you use for your Coinbase account for, I don't know, or some other wallet technology. Well,
I'm a big fan of, the financial accounts. You use different passwords and you use different, emails for that. And I understand that a lot of people, we're all very busy, and I get that, and I understand, there's a lot of management that has to happen, and it can be painful. But what's more painful is when you have to deal with a hack, or you have to deal with fraud on your bank account or debit card or your crypto wallet, right? I mean, that's even more painful.
and
Uh,
think of how much your time is worth. Let's just say your time is worth $500 an hour. So you spend what, 500 hours cleaning up after that mess? That's a
yeah.
$250,000 right there out the door in terms of how much you're spending in terms of time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I think it's important to practice those hard targeting techniques, and we kind of go into some of those now. It's really the big killer in my opinion when it comes to becoming a victim, the big thing that really stands out to me across the board, both physical and cyber attacks. It's setting patterns. It tends to be what it is. The more patterns you set, the easier it is for somebody to pick up on what you're doing and intercept either you physically or in the cyber realm. You have to incorporate variance into your lifestyle. So you have to vary up from a physical perspective. It is smart to vary up your routine. And I'm not saying you have to, I'm going to get coffee at 8 a.m. today, and then tomorrow I'm going at 10:30, but it doesn't have to be a drastic change, but you don't want to set a pattern. You want to set the variance, 15, 20 minutes, or maybe you go to a different Starbucks, or maybe you go to a different coffee shop, right? But you want to break the patterns up, and you want to be very unpredictable, because just like we like the convenience of inconsistency of being able to go somewhere at the same time, same day, and get the same service. Um, Bad guys like victims who are consistent and predictable and easy to target, right? Similarly
And
on the
there's
cyber realm. But yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
obviously there's also some patterns you just can't avoid too.
True, yeah. Traffic patterns are one of them where, it's just you have to get on the road at a certain time or you're going to be stuck in traffic for 2 hours, right? So I get that.
Or your kid's school. It's not like, hey, I
Right,
send you to this school today and send you to this next different school tomorrow. It does not work like that.
right.
There are certain constraints that you are limited by virtue of how society works.
Yep. No, and that's absolutely true. I think within that narrow band of control that you have, you try to vary up as much as you can, which is reasonable, right? There are definitely times and places that, like you mentioned, kids' school, religious institutions typically start at a specific time, and you're gonna have to be there at that specific time. The thing I would look at though with that, right, is you definitely cannot control your schedule all the time. Sometimes you're at the behest of other people's schedules, right? But you can look at what security is present at like your religious institution, your kid's school, even the business park you're potentially going to for food, for coffee, whatever it is. That in itself is a deterrent, right? Like if they have external security, if they have guards out there, if they have cameras, it's like kind of looking at these things because typically if there's external protection agents or there's cameras that are active and operating, or there's good physical security barriers, that in itself is a deterrent to bad guys even thinking about doing something at that location, right? And same with on the cyber side of things, like, are they offering free Wi-Fi? Is it a password protected Wi-Fi, right? If it's just offering free Wi-Fi and it's an open business park, anyone can just set up shop and start doing things, right?
Yeah, and I would, keep in mind too, like, going back to how I would think about how it is, I would literally dissect your life, looking at every element of it, and then I would just slowly tell you, remember, this is a business to them. And the more money you have, the more likely they're going to get that return on investment, knowing you have, $500,000. If they could spend a week tailing you and then think about their expenses and everything like that, and they can walk away with $100,000 or even $25,000, that is still a lot of money. That is, and for some people that is a third or if not half of their year's salary at that point.
Right.
And
It's
that's
it's important to understand that too, right? Like this is why tourist areas are always a target rich environment for for criminals, because they understand that people have their guard down, and they typically have a lot of, they've brought expensive items like cameras or phones, laptops, whatever, what have you. And in that specific area, the wealth distribution may not be there. And I mean, I think it's not a secret that in the United States, when we have a pretty wide wealth distribution relative to the rest of the world, but as you go into some of these other areas, outside of the United States, even if you're just average Joe, middle class person, relative to the area you're in, you're very wealthy. You have a lot of items that, to that environment could be a big payout, right?
yeah.
So you have to consider that aspect as well. It's like you may be traveling to an area where you may only have $10,000 in your crypto wallet, right? But $10,000 in certain parts of the world, that's a lot of money. And it's worth the risk. It's worth the risk because that payout relative to the area is a massive payout.
Oh
And
yeah.
so
And just think about it
understanding
too.
that dynamic as well is important.
Yeah, and think about it too, some people are just obviously likes to flex. They like to show off. They like to brag or humble brag. Where they're going, hey, I'm going to be XYZ and everything like that. That's pretty bad because if anyone remembers the old website, Please Rob Me. It's like some people say, hey, heading to the grocery store right now to pick up milk. Well, you could figure out, it's going to be at least 15 minutes there, buy milk, 5 minutes, come back 15 minutes. Well, they're gone for like half an hour, 35 minutes.
Yeah.
If I know that you have a pattern, I just monitor, hey, you're gone, like poof, go, Rob, come back. And the
And
Rob,
the thing is too, the patterns, right? Like, where do most people keep their safes? Like, typically in their bedroom or
yep,
under their bed, or in the garage, right? So it's like, okay, 9 out of 10 times, if I go into someone's bedroom, master bedroom, I'm gonna find the safe. And if it's small enough, I'll just rip it off the wall and take the safe out with me, and I'll worry about cracking it some other time, right?
yeah,
Um, you don't need much time to do that. Especially, look, people don't consider, like, these guys don't have any regard for your personal property. They'll just damage the wall. They'll pull things out. They'll strap change. We
It's not their house. They don't care.
yeah, they don't care. I mean, it's not their problem. They don't have to worry about living there or repairing all the damage. So, I mean, and we saw this with ATM machines there for a while, where people were just tying chains to ATM machines and ripping them right out of driving off of the truck and ripping them right out of the ground, and then taking the ATM machine and just bashing it until the money came out.
Yeah,
Uh, I mean, these guys just they have no regard for your stuff or your house or anything. So they don't need long to get in there and do that. Similarly with unfortunately, it's similar to your person and your physical health. I mean, they will beat you into a pulp until you tell them what they want to know, and they're not gonna feel bad about it.
exactly. I mean, and then, I mean, now we probably gotten y'all, worried and scared. Now you're probably turning off the podcast, but let's talk about some like solutions here towards everything like that. I think the first thing that the first step in the recommendation is don't be arrogant and don't be prideful. Don't think you're a target. I think that's the first thing, because
Yeah.
the second you think you're not a target, or you're not of value, or you don't have anything of value, and this applies to small business owners too, you become instantly lowering your guard by a factor of like 10,000 at that point.
Yeah,
Just
we, we we had a saying in the Marines: complacency kills, right? And I think that rings true here. If you get complacent, if you just assume that, well, I'm not a target, nobody would want anything that I have. I think it's the wrong attitude approach. I think you have to approach this as, you know, I am all, and I don't want to make anyone paranoid or freaked out, but if you understand that, you are a potential meal ticket to somebody, you don't, not necessarily the guys who go after the high net worth individuals, but somebody out there who may have worse economic conditions than you. They could potentially benefit from taking your stuff. And, to you, $100, $200 may not be a big deal, but to that person, it's, it is a big deal. It's
it's
significant to them.
it's
Um,
paid for the next meal, helps them survive another day on the streets.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think it's approaching the problem realistically and understanding, like, everyone is always a target, but who's more likely to target you, right? Who would make you a victim based on who you are, right?
Right.
Understanding that. If you and look, if you know yourself, you know who you are, and you know what you're worth, and you know the value that you would provide to a criminal organization, then you understand who's going to try to target you, right? You can kind of reverse engineer it and figure that out. Totally agree with you on that. I think also, we gave everyone a good metric there, the $3 million liquid. Some of you guys fall into that space, some of you guys don't, and that's, it's fine. But I think when you get to that $3 million of liquid assets, you need to start considering, um, you know, how liquid is this stuff? How fast can someone drain these accounts or get access? And you really need to start thinking about, okay, how do I delay that? Do I have my two fact turned on? Do I have a specific limit set on my accounts? You can always talk to your bank and put withdrawal limits. So even if they get away, let's just use some round numbers. Say you had 5 million liquid, right, in your accounts, but you set withdrawal limits on all your accounts to 500 a day. Well, let's say you had five accounts, right? You're going to lose some money, and that's fine. It happens, but you're not going to lose everything, right?
You
Um,
should, you should also be spreading your money around, because the FDIC limit is only a quarter
it
of
is.
million.
It
So,
it is. Hopefully, you're doing that too, right? But this goes into some other aspects of risk transference, right? You never want to have your risk profile or all eggs in one basket, which raises your risk profile tremendously, right? It's a big payout. If you spread, same with stock investing, right? You never want to be in one asset class with all your money too long, right? You want to, diversify and spread, right? And that helps, right? I mean, if they have to hack 10 banks versus one bank, um, it's a little bit harder, right? So, risk transference, diversification of where you hold your money, and then really looking at, um, you know, controlling the flow, the outflow of the money. How are you going to control that, right? What are you going to do? Are you going to, have that relationship with the bank to make sure that, if certain indicators go off, um, that money isn't drained, right? Or you don't lose that money. I think there's other ways too. There's some banks that do allow you to, when you call in and make a referral, you have a distress, you have a, duress word, where if you say that word, they know that you're being hijacked, or that, and they'll play along. They know you've either been kidnapped or ransomed. And there's also insurance, that you need to. I think people can look at. You can look at insurance, kidnapping and ransom insurance. I'm not sure how it works with crypto, to be honest. I haven't looked at that yet. I don't know if crypto assets are able to be insured or not. But that's something to look into, right? Do you get the insurance? Do pay a little bit more to ensure that if a situation happens, you do recoup some of your money back. Um, so there's that aspect as well. I think, looking, like you mentioned earlier, your cyber presence. I think every 6 months, everyone should do a self-assessment, on their cyber presence. Like, what information are you actually putting out there? If you went over a 6 month period and you pulled all the data into ChatGPT and they did an analysis on who you are, what does ChatGPT pull out? Or any AI platform for that matter. I use the ChatGPT, but kind of red team yourself and see what is out there about you. What can people deduce from you just on the open web, right?
And I think that's where, where it also might be helpful to, if you don't have the bandwidth or time, a lot of these, if you're an individual that's making $3 million in crypto, it may behoove you to actually, stay in your lane. And I'm not saying don't do anything. I'm saying stay in your lane, focus on what you're great at, but bring in experts like, Al or myself, to actually help you
Right.
out, or to help, assess, what your risk profile is. So like, Al's background is very heavy on the physical side. I'm very heavy on the cyber side, but we also have a way to meet in the middle too. And this is why Al and I are on this podcast together.
Right.
But when you bring that perspective together, you start thinking about the various dynamics and what's going on of things. So, like having spent a lot of time with the physical security people, I'm now more tuned and conscious of how guns, guards, gates, cameras, network video devices all play in my world and sector and cyber, because they live in my network. Or considering not just maybe a technological look of security, but more a programmatic aspect of security, such as dealing with insider threats,
Right.
or executive protection. All these various different elements, travel security, supply chains. They span multiple ways and multiple directions. It is something that you might need an expert in, and especially the more more money and the more wealth you actually have that's available, that you can liquidate in short order. um that's more or less, that's more risk in your profile. And if you think about, think about all the situations that are out there, from ransomware to people attacking your bank accounts, your crypto accounts. They're trying to get it done like within the hour, and the sooner the better, because remember I said this is a business to them. So the second you start, acknowledging that, is the second you start realizing, how bad it can and potentially will get. And from that's just the physical side. Cyber, think about who is your version of your detail, who is your cyber protector that's going to be on there, who's your your companion, who's going to be watching alongside you the entire time. Passwords, alerts, think about this. Your cell phone is your gateway to the world these days, especially with multi-factor. So when you start thinking about all these little different elements, you start realizing, you carry a lot of attack surface, even upon you these days. and it's something that it has to be protected. And you need someone to actually really think about these things. You may not be a Steve Jobs or a Tim Cook or a multi-billionaire, but needs 24/7, 366 around the clock detail. But you do need to make select changes in your lifestyle to actually adjust for the fact that you are of significant value to somebody. And when you are significant value, it makes you a target.
I think also you made a good point on the insider threat. I mean, when it comes to kidnapping and ransom events, there typically is somebody on the inside that was paid off or, you know, pressured into divulging some information or divulging access. So that's, I think it's also important for you to kind of go through and look at your associations. Look at who you're associated with on all social media platforms. I mean, we all have friends that we may have lost touch with who are no longer necessarily um, in the circle of trust anymore, but we may still have them on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, what have you. If they have a lot of personal information on you, let's say they get in a situation and they divulge your information to get out of their situation, so then you're the bigger target. That happens as well. So I always recommend to people, minimum once a year. I kind of recommend every 6 months, go through your friends list and do your friends list purge your friends. I say friends, purge your associations, purge your contacts, especially on your phone. There's people that you're not talking to, you don't need to talk to anymore. Maybe it's time to delete that contact from your phone because and again, the more contacts you have, it's the more chance one of your contacts gets their phone hacked or gets their phone stolen or laptop stolen or something like that. And then somebody has hijacked them and now they're reaching out to the network to propagate the scam, right? So it's one of those things where I think you have to consider that too, right? Like who are you associated with? Who are you still associated with that you may not associate with anymore? These are all areas that as as your net worth grows, I think you have to be very conscious of these things.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, in everything that's just been going on, you have to keep that. I'm going to use the word vigilance is probably the word.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. Yeah.
Just the changing nature of your affiliations too. Like, I'm kind of reminded of, and forgive me the biblical reference here, but I'm just keep reminding and thinking about prodigal son. When you are somebody, everybody wants to be your friend, but
Yeah.
then when you have nothing, nobody wants to be your friend. Uh, and you know, my hope is that you surround yourself with people who always wants to be your friend, regardless of who your money, well, how much money you are, because those are the ones who don't see you as a walking piggy bank.
Right.
They just see
It,
you as a friend.
it's interesting too, as kind of you elevate through different social circles, um, it's like each social circle has its, CD element that targets that specific social class, right? And it's interesting to see as you as you work all these different social classes, you see different types of approaches to get the high net worth individuals to divulge money in certain ways to seedy characters, and then as you go down a couple more levels, it's a different approach. It's a different vector. So that's, I think, another aspect you have to look at is as you kind of elevate, the scams become different. The attack vectors become different. It's different people that are trying to rip you off, not necessarily. It's the old adage, right? More money, more problems, right? And so I think it's true in this case of the more wealth you accumulate, you have different attack vectors that people are taking to remove that wealth from you and take it from you. So you have to be conscious of like where are you at in the social strata and where are the scams happening in that specific circle. I hate to use this term, but I think it makes sense. Like rich people scams are different than middle class scams and vice versa, right? And it's just the nature of the beast, right?
Yeah. And I would, you know, offer that, you know, the more flashy, or I guess, is the more likely you can be a target, at least on the physical side.
Yeah.
But think digitally too. So like, my favorite is all these influencers who like to stage pictures and all that stuff and everything. Like they're driving the Ferrari and stuff like that and everything. And then there's the part of me that kind of goes in the back. It's kind of going, okay, how much of this is real, and how much of this is not?
Yeah. And how much, yeah, and how was it worth you raising your risk profile for that money shot, right?
Exactly. And if you keep repeating the money shot over and over and over again, all you're doing is invoking Pavlov's dog, get a ringing the bell and the salivation. And what's happening is they're salivating and say, okay, they have money. You're just raising your profile to a point where they will make you a target. And even if they extort $10,000 out of you, that's still $10,000 that you no longer have at
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And that's still a pretty decent return on investment, especially, you're elevating your point so much to a point where you are visible and you can establish a pattern and everything like that.
Well, there's the emotional trauma, right? The fact that you have to deal with that now, and and you're gonna have, you're gonna be skittish, and there's gonna be, every time you go somewhere, you're gonna have the paranoia, right? Because that's part of this too, unfortunately. There's an emotional toll on victims, right? And so, I think part of all this is making people aware of that there's an emotional side to this. There's obviously, if you're physically assaulted, there's a mental health aspect to that, but there's also a physical health aspect to that. If injuries are severe enough, you're going to be in a hospital, and not only are you at 10 grand or whatever value that you lost, but now you've got medical bills, and now you can't work. I mean, there's a lot that builds off this, which that in itself, like, that takes an emotional toll on your family and your loved ones, and so there's it I always look at this as like, is the risk worth the reward? Is taking that picture and posting it worth the bad outcome that potentially could happen? For me, social media, I don't make any money on social media, so it's definitely not worth it for me. I do know that there's influencers who make a lot of money on social media, and that's part of their business, right? And if it is part of your business, fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But have you taken proper precautions to ensure that you are protected, right? And that you can continue doing what it is that you do, um, to generate income and provide for yourself, unhampered, right? And so I think that these are all things you have to look at, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily equate, well, I've got a ton of followers and I've got I'm an influencer now, I'm getting a lot of clout on social media. It's like, yeah, but for everyone who loves you, there's probably someone who doesn't like you and who disagrees with what you just posted, or disagrees with what you're doing, or is mad about the fact that you are doing something that they can't do or aren't doing. And so, the unwanted negative attention as well, that comes with that. Are you prepared to deal with that? Are you prepared to, you know, have people outside who potentially want to cause you harm that you don't even know who they are, you know? And, you see the celebrity cases about this all the time where, somebody's out, especially in Southern California where we live, and a lot of celebrities live in the area, that just they're out and about. They were just minding their own business in their neighborhood, and somebody just popped up on them and, I want an autograph, right? Oh, what? I wasn't prepared for this. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, you're a public persona, man. People know who you are. Um, we have a lot of engagement with the tech community, especially the unicorn startups who they're in the media. People know who they are. They know the CEO. They know, they've got to generate buzz for this business. What's your security posture like? Oh, we didn't think we needed any. It's like, man, you're about to be $1 billion+ company. You're about to have a super high net worth. You really need to jump on this, man. So there's that happens, and it's in my opinion, and we've said this on multiple different issues, but I think it definitely resonates, even more with this because we're talking about personal safety, but fortune favors the prepared. If you're prepared, if you're prepared for these type of things happening, your risk reduction is massive when it comes to potential events. I mean, your ability to reduce that risk is huge if you're prepared. But if you're not prepared for it, that's when the surprises happen.
Yeah, and I guess like question to like anyone here, and I know we're live streaming here. You're not gonna be able to like do if Al and I were doing like an ASIS or ISOC or HCCI talk, and we're asking you to raise your hands. Like how many? I know none of you guys can do that, but think about this for a second. Like how many of you guys actually really have a response plan? How many of you guys actually have thought about how would you react or behave when under duress or stress? Like I can tell you for me, having been through an incident, it's actually forced me to rethink about things and how I approach things and how I react. That very first incident really changes your perspective. And God, in my case, even though I got attacked, I didn't walk away with any bodily harm, but I still have to really think about, how do I live with that kind of change and dynamic, in my lifestyle. And it's put me, on a very different footing or position than I was previously, before that. But I would say the same things, like when dealing with that first situation and it's in that incident, and believe me, I will tell you, every aviation pilot will say this: training will always save your butt. The question is like, what training are you putting yourself through when you actually have an actual incident? Cyber, I'm great at because this is my day job. Al, probably the same thing. Physical, it's your day job. You're probably fantastic. Al, you just probably just slam him into the wall and just walk away. But if our roles were
It doesn't
reversed,
come to that, but fully prepared to do that if necessary.
but yeah, but if our roles are reversed, or you actually, and we say personal safety, you just think about yourself, but think about if you have family or extended family and stuff like that. What would you do if stuff happens at that point and level? Your behavior and scope and how you deal with things changes instantly when you start changing situations, scenarios, or even levers, and it just really causes you to think twice or three times about how would you actually do any of this.
And the sad thing, I mean, these wrench attacks were brazen. One of the victims was attacked in front of his family. You know, right in front of the family. Children, wife, present, individuals beating him with a wrench. So, I think people think that because you're going somewhere and you have your family and you have your child, unfortunately, some of these people do not have the same moral standards or moral code that, you know, the majority of society deals with, or values. They don't have that. And you read about some of these attacks that have happened, attacks in broad daylight, attacks in front of family members. A lot of that was leveraged to you know get the family member to compel the family member to convince the victim to give up the password because I mean, very very traumatic situation for all parties involved. um but you have to consider these things, right? You have to consider like these guys are going to use every tool that they have to compel you to give up um whatever it is that they want to get from you.
Yeah, and keep in mind there are no limits. I mean, they will do everything possible to get at you. That includes, I'm looking at just the headlines here. Someone actually had fingers actually severed, and
Yeah,
like,
there was severed fingers. I mean, this is where we're, unfortunately where we're at in 2025. It's terrible, but this is, you don't want to find out in that situation when someone's, severing your fingers that, oh, I really wish I had turned TwoFac on my phone, right? Like that's what we hope this discussion and helps prevent, right? And then I wish I had just varied my route by 15 minutes one way or the other, and then maybe this person wouldn't have intercepted me, right?
yeah,
Or know where I was at. So, I think it's important to kind of consider all these things, the cascading effects of turning on the two-fact, doing these cyber TVAs, refreshing your friends list, looking at your routes to and from work, and varying up your patterns and all, when you
Or
when you cascade all these things, your risk profile drops tremendously, right?
yeah, and you know, I think the worst regret you'll probably make is why didn't I hire Al?
Right. I think
Why didn't I hire Al to do some stuff here and everything for us?
we're I think we're coming up about on an hour here. So one thing we wanted to offer out to everyone is so this is a lot of stuff that we've thrown at you. And a lot of we could probably talk for 5 or 6 hours on all the nuances and individual things that you could do. One thing we'll offer out though is that we'll post a link on the post. But if you want to reach out to us, contact us. If you have some questions, or if you're with an organization that potentially needs some support solving some of these issues, or just even fleshing out like, okay, we think we might need executive protection for some of our C-suite, or we think our cyber profile is a little weak. We would like to increase it. We definitely want you guys to reach out to us. We can have a discussion, talk through the problem. We really love engaging with you guys and just kind of providing our feedback and hopefully point you in the right direction. And if you want to go deeper, we're more than happy to go deeper on it. But we definitely wanted to offer ourselves up as a resource to anyone out there who might be considering upping their security posture in both cyber and physical realms.
Yeah. And, for those of you who are listening to this after the fact, of course, we're posting this talk onto YouTube and LinkedIn. But obviously, there are a lot of expert advice. They're talking of stuff like, multiple approvals or transactions. Don't get me wrong, it is the first step, but it is the first step of many things you have to do. And there is not a one size fit all situation, because you might be worth 3 million today, but tomorrow you're worth 10 million in terms of liquidity. So your profile changes constantly. So, I know a lot of the crypto, idea and concept it's about self-sufficiency. It's about individualism. I can do it myself. We're saying, you got to set your ego aside. You got to set that mindset aside, because you don't live and breathe this. And to keep doing that is only inviting trouble for yourself or your loved ones down the line. And we're not saying that to scare you. We're just saying this is a fact.
Yeah, I mean, there's just we're really only touching the tip of the iceberg of a lot of the things that can happen and in ways the bad guys operate. But to Josh's point, everyone's situation is different, and that's why experts like me and Josh exist, because we're able to look at everyone's situation and provide you with the best recommendations based on our experience and training, and hopefully get you to a place where you feel comfortable, based on your lifestyle, doing what it is that you need to do without having the added stress of a potential security issue, security event, both cyber or physical.
Yeah. All right, folks. So, if you run a chapter like ASIS or ISACA or any of that, you love us to have a more in-depth one-on-one conversation. We love to welcome you. Sorry, we welcome the conversations. Reach out to us. We're happy to come to you virtually or physically to have that conversation. And we welcome the opportunity to continue this contribution. Obviously, there will be more wrench attacks, and so if someone throws another wrench into our plans of podcasting, we'll cover the wrench attacks again.
Yep.
All right, folks. That's it for this week. Next week, we will be doing a schedule change again for our podcast, not because we were talking about schedule change, but because there is some travel in our
travel for Al. Fortunately and unfortunately, I do appreciate getting invited to speak and engaging with people at the conferences and all that. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy it, but it does kind of throw a wrench, no pun intended, into podcast scheduled recordings. So, but we work around it, right?
Amen.